Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss two very different Brexit articles published in the Financial Times yesterday. One is a hopeful sign and the other is of post-Brexit failure on a grand scale. But both of them surely project a trajectory away from a Brexit future. Because despite the Tories and other associated Brexit supporters trying to claim that leaving the EU has given us opportunities, and some even tried to claim we've already benefited from those opportunities, the truth is that we've already entered a phase where even the Conservative government is having to face up to Brexit realities. How on earth do they think their political future can coexist with Brexit? So what are these two articles that I'm talking about? Well, neither of them is major news as far as this channel goes, because I've discussed both of them on this channel before and recently, but there have been developments. One is an offer from the EU to work on a deal which would allow 18 to 30-year-olds in the UK to work and study in the EU for up to 4 years. The deal would be reciprocal, of course. Now, the article did say that Labour are a bit cool about the idea, saying, oh, it seems a little bit synonymous with freedom of movement, which they've ruled out. But this will surely be a pre-election position to take, given that no formal decisions can take place until they're in government anyway, and they're desperate not to add a Brexit dimension to the election campaign. Labour have spent years trying to make themselves as inoffensive as possible to as many voters as possible. They're not going to allow the Tories an easy divide and rule attack this close. But after the election, this is exactly the sort of thing Labour want. Labour have a policy already of seeking increased mobility for certain workers, most notably performers. The idea that they would turn down a deal, which is basically what they want, but for just a slightly different group of people, once in power, seems ridiculous. Yes, it looks a little bit like freedom of movement. Indeed, I would like to see it as a way of reminding people what we used to have and dispelling people's fears of freedom of movement. But it's not freedom of movement at all. It's just reduced restrictions for a brief period of time for a small portion of our population. In fact, as the Financial Times notes, this offer from the EU has come about because the Conservative government, the one that brought us Brexit, have actually been trying to work out ways to improve mobility themselves. Even if the Tories have worked out that their extreme Tory Brexit has gone too far, they are actively working on ways in which they can reverse it a bit themselves without drawing too much attention. Mind you, most of them were never really in favour in the first place, it has to be pointed out. It was all just to appease the far right. Hasn't gone well for them. But from Labour's point of view, their attitude to Brexit can always be explained by two things. The first, they don't want Brexit to be part of this general election campaign. This is no secret. Keir Starmer openly said as much back in 2020. I was sceptical at the time that he would be able to do so. I thought, how are you going to stop Brexit being a major issue at the election? But here we are. Brexit is considered an extremely low priority for voters. The second is that once in power, they are committed to moving as close to the EU as they can without pursuing anything which forces the public to get involved in bitter fights again. The reason for the red lines for now, customs union, single market, EU membership itself, is they would require a much heftier public mandate. Although I'm still not sure about the customs union. So the public would be forced back into those arguments. But anything which constitutes normal international agreement, they can just be done behind closed doors. The government don't need to say anything special about that. And this is what Labour have said they wanted to do. The Tories have set the bar as well. CPTPP membership. That's got no mandate. They didn't have a referendum. Wasn't even in the manifesto. So there's nothing to stop Labour doing anything on that scale themselves. The second article was about the incoming standards checks, due to begin at the end of this month. The government had already indicated that just as with customs controls, traffic flow would be prioritised over compliance checks. In other words, if the traffic's going to be a bit busy, smugglers are going to have an easy time getting stuff into the country because we're not going to carry out checks because that'll slow things down. And I've said for a while, don't expect these new standards checks to take place on the day they're supposed to. And I tried to counter people. People got, were at the start of the year, when in last January, when the health certificates were required and people going, oh, standards checks are coming in, oh, we're going to have shortages. And I was going, no, that is not the case. We were just requiring health certificates. No one's checking them. The check's coming at the end of April. And at the end of April, I said, don't expect those checks to take place then because they will slow things down too far. And do you think the only way I thought the checks were going to come in at the end of April is if we did have the general election on May the 2nd, because then they could come in and before anyone knew what was going on, the election would be over, Labour would be in government, it's their problem. But given that we haven't had that May election, the idea that the Tories are going to allow food shortages to ramp up over summer is madness. The government had already hinted at phasing in over a long time. And now, as I say, now that the election is not going to be in spring, zero way that they're going to go, oh yeah, let's do all these checks and create food shortages and cost ourselves even more seats. And sure enough, the government has now announced that it's not going to turn these checks on at the end of the month because of the significant disruption, or the risk of significant disruption, as they describe it. Another admission that their hard Brexit is too complicated to manage. We're a long way from being told by these charlatans that we wouldn't notice any disruption, only the benefits. None of the benefits, and the government cannot even implement something as basic as import controls 4 years after we left the EU. The situation is this: the Tories have had an official position of leaving the EU, along with the Single Market and Customs Union, which no one voted for in 2016, for 7 years. They've had 7 years. They were completely committed to these policies for over 4 years because we left the EU then. That's it. We're fully committed at that point. And we left the Single Market and Customs Union over 3 years ago. In all that time, we have not been able to set up the people and systems needed to protect our trade borders. So what on earth makes people think they will in the future? Right now, the Tories are about to lose power. So their Brexit plans are in hiatus anyway. But the problems we face are not just Tory incompetence. There is a trade-off. Doesn't matter how competently you set things up, there is a trade-off. We can apply proper customs and standards controls at our borders. I mean, we used to have them before the establishment of the EU as it exists today. So of course we could again. But in those days, we couldn't import as much. And that's the trade-off. We can protect our trade borders, but it comes at a cost of less consumer choice. We'll see products just disappearing from the shelves. The transition will also be messy and will inevitably hamper economic growth because, some businesses will not be able to cope. But the Tories aren't about trade-offs, are they? Their modus operandum is always to promise all of the benefits, nothing but benefits, no costs, no downsides, everything's marvellous. But this is impossible. Now their plan is to accept that they're heading into opposition, but to come back to power. They want to come back to power a few years later. Of course they would. My question is, how does that work? Like, imagine Labour do self-destruct. I don't think that's credible. My main fear for Labour in the future, for a while anyway, there will come a point where any incumbent government, people start to get dissatisfied with. But my main fear, shall we say, in the next 10 years is the Tories find a strategic, charismatic leader and then Starmer starts to lose ground. I don't see this happening for a while. You look at the current frontrunners to replace Sunak and none of them are either strategic or charismatic. But let's say it happens. Let's say the Tories immediately bounce back. They get this leader. How on earth can a leader that is strategic possibly tie their party to the hard Brexit? Because what would they do when back in government? At no point have they ever had a plan for Brexit. By definition, a strategic leader wants plans. They want a plan for everything. Like even now, less than 2 weeks before standards checks were scheduled to begin, the government have just popped up and said, oh yeah, the system's not in place yet. Really? That is massively surprising to me. No way, it's not. I said as much months ago. I have been saying this would happen, but it is a nightmare for businesses because when the government says a thing's going to happen, they have to believe it. They can't just be glib. I can be glib. I could go, yeah, it's not going to happen, is it? Because if it did happen, what's the consequence to me? I look a little bit silly. Businesses are in real trouble. So they have to behave as if it's going to happen. But this keeps happening. They keep being told that a thing's going to happen, then it doesn't. It's not a one-off, it keeps happening. It's been happening multiple times with standards controls, multiple times with customs controls, which are still not in place. The UKCA mark, as well as a host of other less newsworthy issues that affect individual sectors. And even now that the government have admitted that their schedule has been dropped, they haven't produced a new one. So businesses in both Britain and the EU know that from the end of this month, in theory, the government could turn on checks on certain goods at any time. They do not know when. There's no certainty on when this is going to happen. There is no schedule. More uncertainty for businesses. And the main message from business groups over the past decade has been uncertainty is poison for us. How on earth will the Conservatives get business groups flocking back to them if they persist with not having a plan? And how do they get a plan that works with a hard Brexit? You know, we've already seen in the past year the Conservative leadership trying to be pragmatic about Brexit. So despite telling us all about Brexit opportunities, oh, you should take these Brexit opportunities, the Conservative leadership themselves are approaching Brexit as damage to be limited. And they've had to do so, conscious of the fact it's their policy. So they can't openly attack Brexit. Labour can. I mean, they have to be careful not to put the noses of Brexit supporters out of joint. But otherwise, that's why they call it, they attack the Tory Brexit rather than Brexit. But they're free to attack it. So how do the Conservatives approach Brexit in the future without just saying, yeah, that was a bad mistake, we had some idiots in charge, sorry about that? And they can do that. They can do that. Labour have done that. They've resurrected themselves. The Tories could easily do the same. But can they not see that it simply has no long-term future and that unless they start taking it seriously, neither do they. Like right now, they face the realistic, not likely, it's still not quite likely, but there's a credible prospect of the Tories ending up as the third largest party in the House of Commons. They're already facing an existential crisis at that point. Their plan cannot surely be to double down on the policy which put them in that position. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching. And until next time, I'll see you later.